Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event hosted by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, known as USCIRF. I'm Stephen Schnack, and I'm privileged to currently be serving as the chair of the Commission. And I'd like to thank you for attending today's special event on USCIRF's Frank R. Wolf Freedom of Religion or Belief Victims List. And let me take a moment here at the very beginning to offer the Commission's special thanks to Senator Lankford for having arranged this room for us today. So thank you, Senator Lankford. I believe many of you in this room are familiar with USCIRF's mandate from the United States Congress to report on religious freedom conditions abroad and to make recommendations to Congress and the administration for advancing freedom of religion or belief, or FORB, as it's sometimes called. As part of this work, USCIRF has a specific mandate to maintain a list of victims who have been, and I quote, imprisoned or detained, have disappeared, been placed under house arrest, been tortured, or subjected to forced renunciations of faith for the religious activity or religious freedom advocacy, unquote. Currently, USCIRF's victims list includes approximately 2,300 people imprisoned across more than 25 countries on the basis of their religious beliefs. Those listed in our database include members of organized religious faiths, as well as secular humanists, atheists, spiritualists, and members of animist or indigenous religious communities. It also includes those imprisoned for peaceful dissent against government-imposed interpretations of religion. For example, it includes several activists in Iran arrested for peacefully protesting the mandatory religious head-covering laws. It also lists activists in Saudi Arabia imprisoned for peacefully challenging that country's religious male guardianship system. Since its inception, the victims list has been a resource for those seeking information on government violations of freedom of religion or belief. It has also been an important reminder that those affected by religious freedom violations are real people like you and like me. This is important because all across the world, people are suffering. Just this week, we have heard about numerous individuals who are being held. People such as the two archbishops of Aleppo, Syriac and Greek Orthodox leaders who were kidnapped in 2013 on their way to negotiate the release of other kidnapped clergy. Or Gulshan Abbas, a Uyghur woman held in prison, likely on terrorism charges. Those who do such things should be held to account. Today, I'm pleased to announce something important, a new focus for our database, which will be used not only to highlight victims, but also to lift the veil of impunity from perpetrators as well. For too long, religious freedom violators have enjoyed anonymity and evaded accountability for repressing freedom of religion or belief. We will now use the victims list to publicize the names of these perpetrators and assist data collection efforts by those seeking justice for victims of FORB violations. No longer will these perpetrators hide behind vague descriptions as quote-unquote security officials or quote-unquote agents of the regime. Instead, we will now call them out by name. The message of the United States government to these violators should be crystal clear. We see you, we are watching you, and you will be held accountable. We are grateful for the strong and consistent bipartisan support from Congress, as well as our ongoing productive engagement with executive branch officials. I will now turn the podium over to my esteemed colleague, Commissioner Hartzler, to introduce those who will share their stories. Commissioner Hartzler.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Schneck. Good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It is so clear that we cannot forget those who have suffered, those who are suffering now, and those who will continue to experience the long shadow of being locked away for their religion or belief. And at USCIRF, we do just that. The congressionally mandated Frank R. Wolf Freedom of Religion or Belief Victims List, which is running here, is a vital way of capturing the cases of individuals who have been in some way detained, tortured, forced to renounce their faith, or died in custody simply for living out their faith and their beliefs. It is vital that we continue to add to that list so long as oppressors around the world continue to harm those who simply try to live according to the dictates of their conscience. It's also important that we see their faces. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and pictures of these precious individuals remind us of the dignity that they carry. So make sure and stop by the tables over here where we are highlighting one individual from each country that we have designated in our report so that you can see their faces and you can read their stories. And there's also a handout that you can take so you can continue to remember them and you can pray for them. And I would encourage you to go to our website regularly too, where we don't just have the names, we also have their stories and their pictures. And so you can see the individuals and pray for them. And I also wanted to mention on the tables over here, we have copies of our annual report. We have some specific reports that we have done, so you can see some of the work highlighting the abuses in Central Asia and challenges of Jehovah's Witnesses and Burma and India, but also the new list that Chairman Schneck just talked about of the perpetrators. So take the list of the perpetrators. These are mainly judges, but these are the individuals who have convicted and put in prison the individuals that we care about and are causing their suffering. And as the chairman have said, we are naming them and we are exposing them and we will call you out. So now we're going to hear from the voices that the dictators hoped you would never hear, from those who have been imprisoned themselves, who now live in freedom, or who advocate for those who are still being unjustly held or have been killed. One thing is common that many of those speaking today is that they don't just stand up for themselves or people who share their beliefs. They're standing up for others as well, and we join them in that effort today. And thank you for being here to join with these individuals and others across the world who are suffering today. But we are going to hear from people like Jimmy Lai, who is 77 years old, is being held by China for advocating for rule of law and human rights, including religious freedom. We're going to hear from his son, Sebastian, today via video as he continues to advocate for his father. And we will also hear from Bob Fu, who is here, who faced detention and oppression as a Christian leader in China, but ever since fleeing the United States has been a tireless advocate for Christians and indeed all those that the Chinese Communist Party fears because of their faith and their belief. And while China's persecution of its religious community is well known, sadly, the waves of persecution extend even to Europe and can come crashing down more than once. Lisa Khalil is an evangelical Christian from eastern Ukraine, where her family faced discrimination and threats of their faith under the USSR, and then again when Putin invaded Crimea in 2014, when she narrowly averted arrest and escaped to the United States, where she reminds us that those who face persecution are not just statistics, but real people with real families. So thank you for being here. We look forward to hearing your story. Moving south, the continent of Africa is another location where far too many face being targeted and their religious freedom denied. Kola Alapini is a man of bravery and competence, I would add, as an attorney, fighting on the front lines for those thrown in prison under Nigeria's unjust state-level blasphemy laws. These laws sweep up everyone from Christians to humanists to Muslims as they impose a particular view of Islam. His work has helped bring some good news with the recent release of Mubarak Bala, and we're grateful for his tireless efforts and his support of so many. But bravery is also the hallmark of Mashol Nashim, a daughter who will not let the memory of her father be forgotten, nor will she rest until justice has been brought to his murderers. His name was Tahir Ahmed Nassim, and he was an American citizen gunned down in a Pakistani courtroom as he faced blasphemy charges for daring to think differently than the government's imposed views on religion. Thank you for being his voice today. Michelle is not the only young person carrying the flame of religious freedom. Maung Sawidullah is from Burma, and as a Rohingya person, he has faced persecution for his ethno-religious identity, with untold numbers of family and friends targeted with violence, suffering in refugee camps, and being held in unjust incarceration, including an uncle and a cousin who were detained by Burmese authorities. He now leads efforts to bring peace and establish human rights as he pursues an education here in America. The internationally recognized authorities of a country are not the only ones who violate religious freedom. The Houthis, which USCIRF has recommended and the Secretary of State has previously designated as an entity of particular concern, held Kaveh Gureri for 4 years based on his Baha'i faith. And yet, despite this oppression, he continues to be an optimist and hopes to help Yemen become a place where everyone, whatever their religion, has equal citizenship. He believes this will happen based on the capacity for fairness that he sees with Yemen's people, and we share that hope. And finally, we will hear from Negeri Al-Telamarian, who experienced unimaginable treatment as a Jehovah's Witness at the hands of the government of Eritrea. Despite pressure to recount his faith in the most dire of circumstances and torture, despite being held in a metal container in the desert, hear that again, that's how Eritrea holds the prisoners of conscience, in a steel container, shipping container that you see on backs of trucks going around. They park them in the desert, and they put people of faith in there. And he was there for 27 years. And he is here today. He persevered, and we'll be inspired by his story. So it's the least that we can do to stand alongside these brave individuals, to say their names, and most importantly, to listen at their stories, because as their stories are shared, the silence is broken and freedom rings out. So now let us hear from Jimmy Lai's son.
My name is Sebastian Lai, and my father is Jimmy Lai, the imprisoned pro-democracy publisher in Hong Kong. My father didn't grow up around religion. He was born in communist China and escaped Hong Kong when he was 12. As he always says, that was one of the greatest days of his life. He knew that in Hong Kong with the freedoms that was available, that he had a future, that he could hope to hope. As he would say, it was he had never seen this much food in his life up until that point. And then the next 30 years was a real rags to riches story. He went from clothing laborer to founding his own clothing brand eventually, and became a Hong Kong success story. And then 1989 came, the Tiananmen Square protest, and then the subsequent massacres. It was a real turning point in my father's life, and shocked many people in Hong Kong. But my father knew that he had to do something about it, so he founded Apple Daily, a newspaper with the idea that it was going to speak truth to power, that was pro-democracy and kept protecting and furthering the freedoms of Hong Kong, and wasn't afraid to break stories about powerful officials, tycoons, or triad bosses. And so when 1997 came and the British were going to hand Hong Kong over to China, everybody expected my father to leave because he was going to be one of the main targets. There was even an interview by the BBC where he was asked whether he would leave, and he smiles that smile that I grew up with, and this carefree smile, and he says, "I'm Hong Kong's my home. I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to leave unless my life is threatened." But under that smile, he was facing tremendous amount of pressure. After all, he had risked everything that he built in order to stand up for what he believed was right, to stand up for the freedoms of this place that gave him so much. And in that pressure, he realized that this hope that he had, this courage that he had in doing this, was because of God, that God's hand had been guiding him all along. And that marked another one of the greatest days of his life when he found faith and he converted to Catholicism. The hammer didn't come down in 1997. So him and his journalists kept publishing the day's news. As he would say, he gave information to the people of Hong Kong. And with information, people of Hong Kong had choice. And with choice, they had freedom. And then 2019 came, the protests, which led to the 2020 passing of the National Security Law, when the legal system was weaponized against the people of Hong Kong. Everybody had told him to leave at that point. Again, he was in his 70s. He was at an age where he should retire, where nobody would blame him for going off. But he knew that he could leave. He could leave his people behind, leave his what he's done for the last 30 years behind, and live a comfortable life, or he could stay, defend his people, defend his principles, and act as a lightning rod for his journalists for the wrath of the government that was to come. And he knew what was the right decision, so he stayed put. And on a fateful day in 2020, him and a few of his colleagues were arrested. They then sent 200 police officers to raid his newspapers, and when the newspapers kept printing, they sent another 500 police officers, froze the bank accounts, and shut down the newspaper. My father has been in jail since then for going on 5 years now. He's been kept in solitary confinement because their goal is to break him. They want to paint him as this bad person who did all of this out of spite for the Communist Party. But of course, what kind of bad man would sacrifice everything they have to further the freedoms of the people of Hong Kong and stay and defend his people when they need him the most? They put him in solitary confinement and tell him that this is what the rest of his life is going to look like, that he's not going to have the touch and warmth of another human being, and that he will die alone. And so his faith, this force that guided him, that was a compass for him throughout his life, is now a pillar. Is a pillar that supports him, that keeps his mind and spirit strong. His health has gotten much worse, as you could expect. He is 77, 78. He's turning 78 this year. And so he's gotten much older in these horrible conditions. But his faith has gotten stronger and stronger. And the Hong Kong government knows that. And in an attempt to break him, they've denied him the Eucharist. But that's a very bad understanding of religion. It's denying him the Eucharist has only made his faith stronger. He knows that he is doing the right thing, that this is a test from God, and that God is walking right along beside him. He's currently facing trial after 4 years, after 4 years, and has a maximum sentence of life imprisonment if found guilty. It's a show trial. There's 3 government-appointed judges, allegations of tortured witnesses, no jury. So his faith is entirely in the hand of the Hong Kong government. My goal is to free him. I ask that all of you here join your call to your actions and your prayers, so that we may see him free someday, so that this man who has sacrificed everything he has to campaign, to fight for the freedom of others, will one day himself be free and back home with his family, where he belongs.
We appreciate Sebastian sharing Jimmy's story, and I would concur and second the motion there that each of us remember Jimmy as we go home and next week and the next week in our prayers, because prayers make a difference. And wouldn't it be wonderful next year we meet at this time celebrating Jimmy's release? Yeah, that can be the hope and prayer. So now you're going to hear from a lot of the individuals that I introduced earlier, and we've asked them to keep their remarks to 4 minutes, which was so painful, because each one of them, we would love to hear from them for longer, but they'll be here afterwards maybe. But Bob Fu will be our first speaker, and then each one will come up individually afterwards, and after them, then there's going to be a panel discussion that Commissioner Maureen Ferguson is going to lead. So let's welcome Bob Fu.
Thank you, Commissioner Hustler, Chairman Snack, and honorable commissioners. Thank you for providing this platform for a voice for those voiceless, persecuted faithfuls. It's safe to say that the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping had declared war against any authentic faith that refused to make their religion compatible with socialism, communism, and Xi Jinping's thought. So it will take maybe 5 days to count all these names of prisoner of conscience here. And I think the Communist Party has jailed more people of faith, we talk about millions, than the rest of the world combined. So I can only name a few, really, the tip of the iceberg of the atrocity of the Communist Party. Pastor Wang Yi, my good friend, early Ren Covenant Church, was sentenced to 7 years or 9 years imprisonment for simply leading a house church. He was charged for inciting to subvert state power. And Sister Wang Honglan, she's 70 years old this year, was imprisoned since 2021 for simply organizing distribution of the Bibles that were printed by the Chinese government, legal copies of the Bible. So she has been abused, tortured in her prison, and finally, after 3 years, she just had her first trial and still without a verdict. And lawyer Gao Zhisheng, called the conscience of China, who defend all religious faith victims, and in the court, and in that he lost his license, he was forced to disappear and imprisoned for 8 years. And after 8 years, really 9 years ago, he was released and then was re-disappeared. Basically, this is the 8th year he's still under enforced disappearance. Nobody knows, dead or alive, where he is. And Dr. Wang Bingzhang, another Christian democracy activist who is now serving life sentence, who is a permanent citizen, a permanent resident of both US and Canada, right now serving life in prison since 2002. And of course, the Catholic Bishop, Peter Shao Zhumin, who is the Bishop of Underground Catholic Diocese from Wenzhou, who has been repeatedly being arbitrarily detained, and so far we still have not been able to hear him. And Uyghur professor, and Ilham Tuhati, he was a Muslim scholar, very moderate, advocating for ethnic harmony was sentenced to life imprisonment. And Tibetan entrepreneur Sonam Chodron, he is a Tibetan advocate for cultural preservation and faith, and he was imprisoned for promoting simply a Tibetan identity. Finally, my good friend Joshua Huang and Professor Benny Ted from Hong Kong University, of course, Jimmy Lai. They are very dedicated Christian believer, and out of their faith, they have been imprisoned since the Hong Kong Communist Party cracked down in the name of national security law. Please remember them. Thank you.
While the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine has drawn global attention, one tragic dimension remains largely underrepresented, and that is persecution of evangelical Christians in Russian-occupied Ukraine. Despite presenting itself as a Christian nation, Russia has a long history of hostility toward non-Orthodox believers. Evangelicals are often labeled as sects or foreign agents, leading to harassment, threats, arrests, and imprisonment. This is not new, but it's a part of a long-standing pattern of religious persecution that Russia has done. I was born and raised in an evangelical Christian family in Donetsk, now under Russian occupation. My faith made us targets. My father was detained and interrogated by KGB. My siblings were barred from higher education for refusing to join the communist youth organization. My young age is full of painful memories as well. At school, I was publicly humiliated for my faith, and I was made to feel unworthy simply because of my beliefs. Everything changed in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union. For the first time, we experienced religious freedom. But unfortunately, over time, Russia began its descent back into authoritarian regime. And with that, religious persecution returned. In 2014, after Russia annexed Crimea, war broke in eastern Ukraine. Russian-backed authorities seized control of my hometown, and with them came renewed persecutions and repressions. I was accused again of being a foreign agent because of my evangelical faith, and I narrowly escaped arrest. So I had no choice but to leave my home. The Lautenberg program, which is a US refugee resettlement initiative, became my lifeline. It gave me a chance to escape persecution and start a new life here in the United States, where I found safety and freedom. But the persecution of evangelical Christians and other religious minorities is just escalating under Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. Pastors are arrested, congregations forced to flee, and entire communities live in fear, and my own brother is one of them. Programs like Lautenberg are often their only hope. Yet, on January 20th, President Trump signed an executive order pausing refugee resettlement, cutting off this vital lifeline. As someone who has directly benefited from this program, I cannot overstate how critical it is to reopen and expand these pathways for those facing persecution. These individuals are not statistics. They are families like mine, parents shielding their children from fear and shame, people of faith longing for freedom. With the right support, they can thrive and contribute to the communities that welcome them. I stand here today to advocate for the reopening of refugee programs like Lautenberg, This is not just a policy issue. It is a matter of humanity. By providing persecuted Christians and other religious minorities a legal pathway to safety, we affirm the values of freedom and compassion that define us as a nation. Let us not turn our backs on those who need us most. Together, we can ensure that families like mine and countless others have the opportunity to escape persecution, to rebuild their lives, and live in freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and honorable commissioners. In recent times, Nigeria has witnessed a troubling rise in intolerant religious views. Omar Farouk Bashir, a minor, was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment without legal representation for merely asking for his phone back during an argument. Similarly, a young Nigerian Sufi singer, Yahya Sharif Aminu, faced a death sentence, also without legal representation, over the lyrics of a song he shared in a closed WhatsApp group. This may sound unbelievable, but I assure you it's true. I know because I led the legal team that overturned both convictions. He was charged with insulting the religion and the prophet, also known as blasphemy, under Section 382, subsection B of the Kano State Sharia Penal Code Law of 2000. He remains in prison as we challenge this before the Supreme Court of Nigeria. I also represent Mubarak Bala Mohammed, a former religious prisoner of conscience. His wife had just given birth to their son 6 weeks earlier, before Bala was abducted and detained for 4 years without trial for daring to be different. Fearing he might never see his family again, Mubarak pleaded guilty. He believed the adage, "He who fights and runs away lives to fight another day." However, he was shocked when the judge sentenced him to 24 years imprisonment. Thanks to international outcry and the efforts of human rights activists in Nigeria and abroad, Mubarak was eventually freed. Yet, he remains vigilant, knowing he would never truly be safe or free in Nigeria now that his face is infamous. While these three individuals were fortunate, Deborah Samuel Yakubu was not. She was brutally attacked with stones and sticks until she lost consciousness. And then her body was set on fire by a mob, which included her colleagues, classmates, who we were all training at a teacher training college in Sokoto State, northern Nigeria. Deborah had complained that a WhatsApp group meant for tutorials had been misused to share Islamic verses. The police arrested 2 individuals, but failed to prosecute diligently. Consequently, the court discharged and freed the accused due to the state's refusal to advance the prosecution. Mr. Chairman, honorable commissioners, the list of such incidents goes on. The state has emboldened the perpetrators, while the victims have become the persecuted. The United States cannot be exonerated from the spike in these murders and violations. By delisting Nigeria from the list of countries of particular concern, the CPC list, it has indirectly, perhaps directly, contributed to these atrocities. It is time to remind Nigeria of our obligations under international human rights law and treaties she willingly signed. There is no more time to waste. Delay is dangerous. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mashal Nasim. I'm here today to share my father's story in hopes of helping those who have gone through something similar or are advocates fighting for justice against anti-apostasy and blasphemy laws. To give you a bit of context, I'm a Pakistani American and I'm the daughter of Tahir Ahmad Nasim. My father Tahir was born in Peshawar, Pakistan into an Ahmadi family following the Ahmadiyya sect of Islam. Ahmadis are a minority religious sect of Islam. However, in 1974, under Pakistan's constitution, they were declared as non-Muslims. When my father was young, he'd spend hours upon hours reading religious books, studying the faith, and analyzing his own beliefs. Shortly after he got married and had us, he made the bold decision to leave the Ahmadiyya sect as his views had changed, and he went on to embrace Sunnism. Despite my father changing his views, he still remained a Muslim and still kept interest in speaking about his faith and studying Islam. Even though he was now part of the largest sect of Islam, he was still considered a religious minority, as it is not widely accepted to talk about Islam in any manner other than what was allowed and deemed as appropriate. In 2018, my father started using social media frequently to share his thoughts about his faith, thoughts that were viewed as controversial by some. He began to make connections online, and shortly after, some of the individuals he chatted with ended up inviting him to Pakistan to have an open discussion pertaining to his faith and religion as a whole. My father was a simple and truthful man who believed a promise when he was given one. His friends, quote unquote, had promised him this was not a setup and that anything they discussed would not be held against him. However, these assurances were all to deceive my father, and the reality was that the individuals had collaborated with the police, and shortly after my father began to share his views, the police arrested him on charges of blasphemy. The individuals who had set up the meeting had used the extremely restrictive laws to entrap and imprison him. My family immediately reached out to the U.S. Embassy in Peshawar, Pakistan, as my father was a U.S. citizen, to see if they would be able to work with the Pakistani government to get my father out. However, nothing came of it, and they were not able to provide legal assistance to my father or work to get him released, despite his status of being a U.S. citizen. My father spent over 2 years in a high-security prison on charges of alleged blasphemy. It's hard to fathom how an allegation could get you imprisoned or worse, killed. However, that's exactly what happened. On July 29th of 2020, more than 2 years into his imprisonment, my father was awaiting a court hearing when a malicious individual snuck a gun into the courtroom my father was in and fatally shot him as he waited for his hearing. Hours later, my family and I would be given the news that would change our lives forever. Not only did we learn about his passing, we also learned the gunman wasn't the only one involved. Lawyers who would frequent the jail had collaborated with the perpetrator to plot for my father's death. You would think that after such an incident, there would be an outpouring of support and the recognition that what happened was unjust, but that would be a naive assumption, as shortly after the killer was taken into custody, lawyers and policemen were seen taking lighthearted selfies with him, and he was greeted with hugs and kisses upon his arrival in court. My father's death was made into a mockery. Years later, I have yet to process the reality of losing my father. Navigating life without my father has become the hardest challenge I've had to overcome. Only recently, 3 months ago, have we learned that the killer was given a life sentence, yet we also simultaneously found out that the two masterminds behind the plot to kill my father in that courtroom were acquitted. A complete slap in the face of justice we so desperately needed. I come here today not on the premise to help you understand how great of a man my father was, or for any sympathy regarding the injustice that occurred to my family. I'm here today to help you understand how badly we need these blasphemy laws reformed, and how desperately we need full justice of prisoners of conscience. What is happening in Pakistan is completely inhumane. The number of individuals arrested under these blasphemy laws has only been increasing ever since my father's death. The Pakistani government has made it near impossible to practice your faith if you are a religious minority. It is a tragedy for humanity to continue to ignore this issue, as injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It should not be a crime, nor should you fear getting charged with one if you choose to speak about your faith or let alone practice it. It is a human right. Freedom of speech and freedom of religion allows us all to practice our own faith, live in harmony, and not be forced into thinking a certain way. If there's anything that you take from my speech today, it's this. I'm tired of thoughts and prayers and sympathy. I need actions, not words, which is why I'm here today to share my story in hopes that what happened to my family will never happen again. How many more deaths will it take before something changes? Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's an honor to speak before you today about our people. They are Rohingyas who have been suffering unimaginable serious consequences in Myanmar. The suffering of the Rohingya is not simply an issue of ethnic conflict, but one of the religious intolerance, where our people are targeted, dehumanized, and violently oppressed due to our religious identity. The atrocities I'll be sharing today is not abstract. They are a direct result of a state-sanctioned, religiously motivated agenda to erase the Rohingya. The religious intolerance in Myanmar has led to a series of violent campaigns against Rohingya, including forced displacement, arbitrary arrest, and the mass killings. We, at the Arakan Rohingya Society for Peace and Human Rights, ARSPH, a civil society organization, documented the arbitrary arrest of 2,112 Rohingya individuals by Myanmar military junta between 2016 and 2017. The majority of these arrests took place in Butidong, Mondo, and Ratidong township. One of my immediate uncle, Abu Subian, and his son, my cousin brother, were also among those arbitrarily arrested. The only reason of arresting my uncle was because of being a voice for our village and his identity being a Muslim and a Rohingya. The persecutions of Rohingya didn't stop there. Today, the Rohingya continue to suffer not only from the brutality of Myanmar military junta, but also from a Buddhist Rakhine rebel group, Arakan Army. We, at the Rohingya Forcibly Displaced Myanmar National Representative Committee, a civil society organization based in Cox's Bazar refugee camp in Bangladesh, we documented the abduction and detention of over 900 Rohingya by both military junta and Arakan Army in 2024. Most of this arbitrary detention took place in Butidong, Mondo, and Seitue township. You know why does this continue? It's only because of our religion. Our identity as Muslim remain a point of vulnerability in a society that is overwhelmingly Buddhist. The plight of Rohingya is a tragedy that required urgent global attention. By doing and or collaborating with those documenting these atrocities, raising awarenesses, and holding perpetrators accountable, we can push the world leaders to act more strongly. All of us, inside and outside of this room, have a moral obligation to stand against this injustice. We have the power to influence the change. We must not allow the Rohingya and all other people suffering in silence. Rohingya deserve the right to live free from the religious persecutions and violence. Let us clearly and unequivocally say that religious persecution of any group, in any country, in wherever it is, will not be tolerated. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you very much. It's both an honor and deep responsibility to stand before you today and share my story, a story of faith, hope, and resilience in the face of persecution, and a story that speaks to universal principles of justice, equality, and religious freedom. Let me begin by expressing something fundamental about Yemen, a country of brave, pure-hearted, and generous people. Yemen is a land where the doors of homes open wide for friends and strangers alike. It is a place of profound hospitality And despite my identity as a Baha'i, a faith often misunderstood in a society deeply shaped by its traditional value, but things changed dramatically in 2008 when I was arrested for my beliefs. After 4 months, I was released. But life became increasingly precarious, especially after 2014, when the Houthis assumed de facto control in Yemen. Under the rules, persecution of Baha'is escalated, reflecting broader societal and political instability. I recall a youth campaign we initiated, a space where people from diverse backgrounds gathered to explore how to contribute to the betterment of society. It was a beacon of hope, bringing people together in unity and service. Tragically, this campaign ended with the detention of all attendees, including women, children as young as 12, and men from different walks of life. The streets leading to the venue were surrounded by security forces, and we were all arrested and sent to the National Security Detention Center. But this time, my imprisonment lasted 4 years. In prison, our faith was tested like never before. The majority of the inmates had never heard of the Baha'i faith. At first, they called us infidels and treated us with suspicion and disdain. They refused to talk to us or share food with us. Over time, however, some of them insisted on eating and talking with us to break down the prison rules established by the officials and inmates extremists. I counseled them several times not to break the rules and bring harm to themselves, but they insisted. They said, we are all in one prison. Our jailers should know how inhumane it is to isolate people based on their religious backgrounds. The guards separated the Baha'i inmates from each other and told us that Baha'i friends had converted to Islam and that we should do the same. It was difficult not to have access to each other. I'm grateful to some guards who didn't believe that people should be imprisoned for their religious beliefs. And they would sometimes allow me to visit my friends in their cells. We encouraged each other to be steadfast. The camaraderie among us was a lifeline. We drew strength from our faith and from each other. Religious freedom and equal citizenship are not abstract ideals. They are the foundation of a just and harmonious society. For Yemen, these principles are not only urgent, but essential for healing and rebuilding a nation torn apart by conflict and division. My time in prison reinforced this belief, showing me that even in the harshest circumstances, transformative conversation and actions can take root. These experiences taught me that the journey toward equal citizenship and religious freedom in Yemen requires both a societal shift and practical actions. First, there needs to be an emphasis on education, teaching principles of justice, inclusion, and the oneness of humanity from a young age. Second, There must be safe spaces. There must be safe spaces for dialogue, where people from different legal and from different backgrounds can come together, challenge prejudices, and explore their shared values. Lastly, legal and institutional reforms are essential to protect the rights of all citizens, regardless of their religion or belief. Yemen's strength lies in its people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, USCIRF commissioners, staffs, and estimate advocate. Thank you again for this good opportunity. My name is Nagada Taklamariam, and I spent over 26 years in Eritrea Gulagus, not for any crime, but for my Christian faith as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. As some of you know, over 30 years ago, Jehovah's Witnesses were banned and stripped of citizenship by presidential decree. In the middle of the night on September 17, 1994, I was abducted from my home in Asmara. Soldiers stormed in, waking my family and dragged me away in my pajamas. For several years, I was imprisoned in a container made of metal sheet. Touching the wall during the day could burn our skin, and we froze at night. We were deprived of medical care, overworked, and underfed. We were forced to live ourselves outside in an open field, like animals, under the constant watch of guards. I was never criminally charged, never tried, and never given hope of release. The worst torment was their effort to break our faith. One night, soldiers ordered me to dig a hole deep enough to stand in. Too weak to lift the shovel, they threw me into a hole. They had dug and threatened to kill me unless I put on a uniform and joined the military. They fired shots near my head. They told me another prisoner had already been killed. Still, I could not betray my faith. They burned me up to my neck in the burning hot sand. I survived, but sadly, others did not. Eritrea continued to imprison, torture, and let die those who simply want to worship in peace. I was released in December 2020, along with 27 others. Many though remained. Last year saw a spike in imprisonments. Today, 68 Jehovah's Witnesses remain behind bars, including Henok Gobru, who has been imprisoned for 20 years. And 10 elderly believers are 70, among them 86 years old, let Abraham testify. The condition remains inhumane. Basic medical care is non-existent. Some, even after getting very ill, underwent serious surgery, but we were thrown back into prison with days before they could properly heal. Fathers and mothers are torn from their home and families. Unlike other prisoners, Jehovah's Witnesses are denied official family visits. Some of my fellow prisoners never saw their children grow up, missed their children's weddings, and were unable to attend the funeral of their spouses, parents, or siblings. A son is now imprisoned in the same facility where his own father died for his faith. Some imprisoned have other family members in the same or different prison. Their spouses, parents, siblings, and cousins. Though I am free, my heart remains with those unjustly imprisoned. Thank you for shining a light on their suffering. I hope that they, too, will experience freedom as I have. But I ask, will they endure 26 years as I did? Will they die in prison like some of my dear friends? Or will they find relief from Eritrea perpetual prisoners. Today, I am honored to speak on behalf of them, as well as the other 167 Jehovah's Witnesses imprisoned in other lands. I thank everyone here for your sincere concern of religious prisoners and for continuing to use your influential voice to speak out against religious freedom violation. No human should suffer simply for their faith. I'm eternally grateful knowing this distinguished group is still fighting to someday bring relief to those still suffering. Thanks to all of you. Religious prisoners are not forgotten.
Thank you so much to each of you. Each of those stories was just incredibly powerful and moving, and we're so grateful that you traveled to Washington to share these stories with us today. We're going to move now to a panel with a different perspective, a perspective from government and advocacy. So we have two panelists who have joined us today. Thank you so much. First, we have Fernanda San Martin Carrasco, who is a former member of parliament from Bolivia, and she is the current director of the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, which is a network of parliamentarians and legislators from around the world committed to combating persecution and advancing freedom of religion or belief. Fernanda's commitment to championing human rights, women's rights, and freedom of religion began at a very young age, devoting her academic work, activism, and legislative initiatives to advance these causes. We also have with us David Burrows, who is a former member of parliament from the UK. He served in the parliament there for 12 years. He then was appointed as the Deputy Special Envoy for Religious Freedom, and he now serves as advisor to the Article 18 Alliance. So thank you both for joining us today. So you both work as leaders in the fight for religious freedom within governments or parliaments, or with governments and parliaments. So can you share why you think it's important from a government perspective to advocate for religious prisoners of conscience? And maybe you could tell us how you have advanced for religious freedom at the International Panel of Parliamentarians and at the Article 18 Alliance. So maybe you could each share with us the why you think it's important to advocate and how you've done it within your respective spheres. Fernanda.
Parliamentarians play and have a special duty to ensure that human rights are protected and that individuals are not persecuted. It's very important, the role of parliamentarians in upholding democratic values, and that reflects into the protection of minorities, into the protection of freedom of religion or belief for every individual, because it's the core of democratic principles. All people should be free of practicing without fear of retribution, and parliamentarians play a very specific role in their bridging society and government. They are this way of connecting. So they have also this unique position of leadership and a moral obligation also to ensure that the human rights are upheld and that no one needs to be persecuted and that no one needs to suffer because of their beliefs. I think that is one of the main things of why it's important that they connect with the communities, they connect with people, they connect with exactly with those individuals that just we heard the testimonies some time ago. It is very important to that, and at IPP4 what we do is we train these parliamentarians, we provide the support that they need so they can advance and understand how important it is to advocate, and to advocate from the beginning of when they see and they can identify that there has been a persecution, there has been a discrimination based on their beliefs. And that's how we built a community of parliamentarians that are no ordinary parliamentarians. Those are very committed parliamentarians, change makers that really want to bring to their communities and to the others' communities, because this community that we build at IPP4, parliamentarians really build a safe space where they can stand in solidarity one to the other, but also work together. And that is very powerful, because that goes to their constituencies, that goes to their communities, and that's what we do at IPP4, and we try to make sure that they have the tools to advocate in the name of the communities, of the persecuted, and that's what we are doing with IPP4.
David, do you want to add to that, the why and the how?
Yeah, I'll sort of add, I mean, the why is in many ways obvious question to answer. We heard it from the victims and families of victims of why we have to be advocating for all those who are persecuted for their faith or belief everywhere and for everyone, but particularly obviously when they're imprisoned for their faith or belief. I think the why, the priorities, and why should it be a priority? I mean, we're here probably preaching amongst the converted, but why out there is it not a priority? Why are some governments not actually prioritizing these issues? You know, they may take a view, the governments or parliaments, that what's their priority? Is it the fact that it could be for global poverty or infant mortality? Now, both those things are going down, but persecution is going up. And that's why we need to do more about it, and no better place, sadly, to focus people's minds and hearts collaboratively is when people are imprisoned for their conscience. Now, I say that because in the UK, it's not always had such attention, and it's always often the case because of the civil society, the activists who bring it to the attention of folk like as I was and we were as members of Parliament. But back in the day, the Jubilee campaign, 20 or so years ago, worked with Lord Orton. I suppose that's the closest, the peers are the closest to the Senate here. And he recognised that to get to their hearts and minds with all the other attentions on their plate is individuals on behalf of others. And so they were able to adopt or sponsor an individual prisoner of conscience, and that then grew the movement in the UK, which also led to people advocating in Parliament, and then it led to a bipartisan, all-party parliamentary group now of 150 who have a duty to advocate not least for individuals. So that happens to government as well. Government also, there's a bigger issue about why should they focus on individuals? Because the policy position often is no, we can't highlight individuals. It's not part of our policy. We're more broad than that. We can't get involved in individuals. So how do we do that in the Alliance, which works with 43 government representatives from across the world? How do we do that? We work collaboratively. We are all in this together. So we work with our panel of experts who are on the ground talking to individuals, to activists, to bring it to the table for those government representatives to understand. Some of them don't understand how to advocate. We need to help educate them and then operate collectively. It's much better multilaterally rather than individually to make sure we do better for those who are persecuted. But also, we also need to learn why have they got there in the first place. Blasphemy was mentioned. How are we going to campaign better to end those laws? How are we going to prevent people getting into prison in the first place? So the duty of governments is to prevent as well as to advocate. And we can do that by making sure that this issue is not left in a room or side room of government, but is a mainstream activity at international level, at the UN and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Can you share with us some specific ways or a way that you may have seen that you've really made a difference in a particular case because of the advocacy, either of yourself, personally, or the association that you're working with?
Yes, I was thinking of a case of the Rastafarians in Malawi. So the Rastafarians are a minority in Malawi. And they have been a long time sidelined in terms of education. So the policies that require the students to cut their hairs to go to school. And that was described by the government as a public policy of uniformity among the students. So there were a lot of children that were left, of course, without education. And IPP4 has parliamentarians in 95 different countries of the world. In Africa, we have established a caucus of IPP4, and the members of parliament started advocating for these minorities. And they started, first of all, and what is important is to speak out. Speak up, because they need really to put what is going on in the agenda, in the public agenda. So the parliamentarians start also working with the communities. They start raising awareness and also talking to the judiciary. And in 2023, the ban on dreadlocks is lifted. So it is because of those efforts. That may not be the only effort, but as David was pointing out, it is a collaborative effort. But of course, everyone in their spaces needs to take action and needs to move forward to advance freedom of religion or belief. And that was a very successful event. And after 2 years, I think it was 2014 or 2015, 2014, no, 2024, sorry. It was also a sentence in a court that definitely confirmed that the ban was lifted. So all different actors play different roles, and that is very important to advance in a collaborative work.
Mm-hmm. David?
Yeah, I know this is saying this with a massive dose of humility, because it's just the responsibility and the honour goes to those on the ground who enable the release to take place, and indeed those who've been released. But last February, the Article 18 Alliance, it highlighted, through particular efforts of the then Chair Fiona Bruce, who's in the room here, cases involving wonderful women who were imprisoned for their belief, their faith. There's Hannah, there was Hudu, and in fact, first Hudu was in February, it was highlighted, her case, and again, around blasphemy and issues like that. And then, but where that happened, that it was a multilateral statement, everyone a team game, working together to issue a statement. Now, how far did that go? Who knows? But then it required an NGO to say, look, please can we do something more? And this is why it's good to be talking about this in the Senate area, because it then required a prompt to say to Fiona, please can you just raise this now in Parliament? Raise the name of Hannah, this was Hannah from the year before, raise her name, and by raising that name, it just provided enough of a window to shake a cage in Somaliland to enable that release. And that happened directly, and again with Hudu as well. And so there is just those prompts, after all the hard work that everyone's involved in collectively here and elsewhere, that can lead to that outcome. And that should be encouraging to us in terms of the relationship that we build, not least with parliamentarians as well as governments.
So all of these stories were incredibly moving today, but I'm wondering if there was something in particular that really jumped out at you. For example, Mashal Nassim's story really, I have 3 daughters myself who adore their father. And your story was just particularly moving to me, your advocacy for your father. So I'm wondering, was there something in particular that may have touched or jumped out at you today?
I think that all the stories are stories of courage, of resilience, and I really, it is, I can't imagine how heartbreaking it must be. But I think I also see in Mashal's history a lot of strength. I also have a daughter, so I also identify with that. And the determination to overcome the grief and to not just try to bring justice to your father, but also try to make this a better and safer world. And by advocating for the end of blasphemy laws, it goes beyond just your case. It goes beyond just thinking of what happened. And that, I think, it takes a lot of courage, and it's what we need there is to speak out and became that activist that you became. Respects.
David?
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you. Thank you for speaking. It's to replay the trauma and the horror of losing a father, or we heard the trauma of families, loved ones locked up is not easy. So just thank you very much. Dr. Sang here would probably would kick me if I didn't say how much we rely on younger people's voices, and so to commend you and encourage you to keep going in your voice, because it has an extra impact. It really does. And it's not just words. And I know you don't just want words and sympathy or need prayers. You want action, and that speaks very loudly and clearly. And the fact that the reminder is that it's not just about us advocating a one-off hit to say a tweet or a letter, or just to say, hey, we're doing what we can for prisoners of conscience. It's an ongoing effort. We've got to keep on doing that. And there's also the extra impact, which was so incredible with yourselves and indeed others. It goes on. The impact goes on. And we can't just, even for those prisoners who've been released, their justice call still goes on for them and for the sake of others.
So working in this space, I think we all feel the weight of the evil when we hear these stories that just tear at your heart. So perhaps we'll close this panel with the question, asking you to give us something encouraging to walk away with. And perhaps I'll just share briefly, I see Britt and Audrey Hancock here. And I think that story, if you're familiar with it, is a particularly encouraging story. And Fernanda, you mentioned the collaborative effort, and I think the story of the release of those 13 missionary pastors of Mountain Gateway is a very powerful story of that collaboration, of the success that we can have with that collaboration. The Hancocks actually moved to Washington to walk the halls of this Congress, and they found an advocate in Congressman Robert Aderholt over on the House side, and many others that he brought. They found advocates in Senator Katie Britt and Ted Cruz and others who then pressured, asked for more sanctions, which were a targeted sanction that was effective. The State Department became engaged. Civil society organizations became engaged. Alliance Defending Freedom did very admirable and tenacious work. And when those 13 prisoners were released, I think the story that I personally related to most was that of the young mother who was imprisoned, taken away from her 2-month-old child. And when she was released from prison, the Hancocks told me she weighed 80 pounds. So she was nearly dead. But yet, because of the advocacy and the collaboration, she was released and probably barely saved, and was reunited with her child, who was then almost 1 year old. But that's a beautiful success story. So let's leave on an encouraging note. Share with us something that encourages you in this space.
I think that what encourages me is really to see and to hear from the stories of the survivors. The resilience, the strength, overcoming the pain, overcoming and being so generous with humanity after all they have endured. I think that is what gave us the strength, their resilience, their strength.
Thank you, David. You want to close us out?
There is hope, and in the midst of bleakness, and one of the lights. I mean, last year Fiona Bruce actually just met up with Anna Lee from CSW and just heard about the case of Pastor Lorenzo, who was in detention for 3 years and no hope of being released, in fact, getting into worse conditions. And it did lead to advocacy. The Alliance got involved. It meant, at the time, our UK government said, no, you don't touch it. Don't say anything. Don't put any letter out there. And we may get that wall from officials, from governments. But then people kept on going. Advocacy continued. Alliance continued to share their concerns and met with the wife. And and then it carried on, and then more recently, the advocacy continued again, and indeed, lo and behold, the UK government decided to publish an open letter about Pastor Lorenzo, and things changed, and eventually he got released. And he was released, and obviously other Cuban prisoners as well. The story continues, but that's just shows a collaboration when you think least expected, something's going to happen that's good, and it did happen, and respect to everyone else who's been part of that release. And so we've got to keep going. As Churchill said, keep going, keep going.
Thank you for sharing your perspective.
Thank you very much to the panelists and Commissioner Ferguson for that important conversation. I'd like a moment to introduce two commissioners, Commissioner Mohammed El Sanusi, Commissioner Asif Mahmood, who would like to each offer a very short reflection. Commissioner El Sanusi.
Thank you so much, Chair Steve here. And let me just begin by really express my appreciations to our witnesses here. I mean, I really appreciate your courage, your dedication, and your voice for those who are voiceless in prison. You are speaking to us and to the world about their situation, and we join you in advocating for them. So thank you so much. The second point I want to make is that I just want to agree with my colleagues, Commissioner Steve and Commissioner Vicky here in their commitment, and Commissioner Maureen as well, and Asif, in our commitment to actually to work with you and to raise this issue of the prisoners of conscience. This is a commitment that we make collectively, and we work with all of you collaboratively, as you heard, so that we can leverage the collective. As just mentioned by my friend David here, is that this is an issue that not only, it cannot be handled by one person or one entity. We need to work together, and we need to work with governments. The lawyer here made it very clear. Engagement with government is the key. We have to talk to the government. We have to tell them, our concerns, and we have to work together as a civil society, as governments, and every, society or every element that could help to free those who are in prison right now. And when they're free, what we will do, we all celebrate our collective efforts. Just a couple of weeks ago, we heard the good news. Bello was released, from Nigeria. Abdul Bagi Said Abdu and Noor Georges were released from Egypt. And it is a collective effort, and we basically celebrate that. So thank you so much.
I want to start with the same note. I really cannot admire and praise the bravery and courage you have. Many of you who have personally suffered the prisons and harassment and pain, but even more importantly, when your near and dear, your parents, your siblings have been suffering or are suffering. This is an example that we really care, and people from very different corners of the world are over here. And I believe damage done in one little society is a threat for many societies thousands of miles away. One regime shutting down people from freedom of belief and freedom of religion, that is a danger for so many other people. And we can only do this when we are together. You are our ears and you are our eyes. And you are really a roadmap for us to save so many people, speak for so many. We can only work together to make this, to come over this challenge. We know there has been more perception, more awareness, and more advocacy about these issues, but at the same time, challenges are much bigger, much tedious. The regimes are getting more dangerous and more brutal. and we have to work tomorrow much harder and stronger than before. I just want to assure you, I know all my commissioners are united and our whole staff. And honestly, at this time, more than commissioners, all the staff who work with USCIRF, who I can speak for, their work is unmatchable. How much time and energy and resources and sacrifice they put, I think we should acknowledge them, and we are here with you, we can work with you, and we want tomorrow better for so many nations far away, and I assure you we'll keep on working. Thank you so much again.
Actually, speaking of staff, I want to take a moment to thank the staff right now, and maybe we could give them a little applause as well for the great work the staff has done. May I humbly request that we now pause in silence to reflect and bear silent witness to the stories that we've heard today and to all of the victims. Thank you. USCIRF wants to commend each of today's presenters for their extraordinary bravery and heroism in the face of brutal oppression. No person should ever have to experience what they and their families have faced. And USCIRF commits itself to doing everything it can to help protect these families and the thousands of families like them around the world who suffer. For more information to this, about and to access the victims list, I'd encourage all of us to visit uscirf.gov, our website, and to click on the victims list at the top of the page. It's searchable in terms of religion, it's searchable in terms of alleged crimes that were committed and so forth. I encourage everyone to visit the site. I want to thank everyone here today for joining in today's solemn occasion. This meeting is adjourned.